agriculture. So this is just an introduction. The number one place that agriculture takes place is actually in forests. And you might be saying, Dehart, that makes 0 sense. So let me introduce forests and why they're important, and we'll talk about why agriculture usually takes place in the forest. So again, this is not in blue, so you don't need to write this down. So why are forests important? They cover 31% of the land on Earth. So a little under a third of the land is forests, which is awesome. Ecosystems depend on them. We talked about different forests when we had our biomes. So we had like a temporal seasonal forest, a temperate rainforest, a tropical rainforest. So forests are really important for that. They act as carbon sinks. So let's think about this again. We'll do a question. What is a sink when we talk about matter cycling? So this question's gonna go, she's not here. This question's gonna go to, I already asked you a question today. Carson. Nope, okay. Anthony. So what is a sink when we talk about matter cycling? So it says that this acts as a carbon sink. So there's sinks and there's sources, right? One emits carbon, one captures carbon. So what do you think a sink is? Yeah. Perfect. So for the carbon cycle, forests are really important because they go through photosynthesis, they grab the carbon from the atmosphere, and they store it for a long time. And they also provide people with jobs. However, deforestation and degradation. So the main cause of deforestation is agriculture, and the main cause of forest degradation is logging. So in most countries that agriculture happens, they take the rainforest or they take some kind of forest and they just clear it out. This is because if you look at the produce you get when you buy it from the store, most of the time it does not come from the United States. Most of the time the food that we're getting is coming from a different country. And so those countries, the more space they have to grow food, the more food they can grow and the more money they can make. And so what they do is they find whatever land they have, land that's not being used, and usually that land is a forest. And so they'll go in and they will just clear out a forest and they will turn that land into agriculture land. So either for cows, for pigs, or for growing crops. The biggest problem with this is that rainforest soils, or forest soils in general, but mostly rainforest soils, are actually not very fertile. They're not great soils. And that's because as the rain comes down, it takes all of the nutrients in the soil and it washes it deeper and deeper. And so that soil is really only good for like 2 or 3 growing seasons. And so after 2 or 3 years, that soil is not going to yield good crops. And so what are the people going to have to do if they want to grow more crops? Cut down more forests, right? They're going to have to cut down more forests and use that soil even though it's still poor. And so it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you cut down the forest, you grow crops on it, the soil goes away, you have to cut down more forest to grow more crops. And so it's just a really terrible chain of events. So it says we're losing about 18.7 million acres of a forest annually. So every single year we're losing about 18.7 million acres. That is equivalent to 27 soccer fields every minute. So we're cutting down a lot of trees to make places for agriculture. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like, just a visual.
A worldwide disaster. In the 1980s, the world learned that the Amazon was endangered.
Trees are falling at a startling rate. 77,000 square miles.
An area twice the size of Belgium.
The size of New York State. The size of California disappears.
And why it was so important to save it.
1/5
The oxygen we breathe. 20% of
the world's fresh water.
half of the species of life on Earth is in these forests.
It's an ecosystem the entire world needs for its survival.
By the 1990s, it seemed like it was too late.
The destruction accelerates.
More than twice as fast as previously believed.
Virtually impossible to control.
Once it is gone forever.
Then something changed.
The annual destruction rate of the Amazon rainforest has dropped.
By 70%, the lowest rate of deforestation since records began.
Amazon could achieve the end of deforestation, a huge accomplishment.
But in order to keep it safe, there is one condition.
Protecting the forest is a continual process. Brazil will need to stay vigilant.
But it didn't.
The Amazon is burning.
Consumed by fire.
Fires have been raging.
Thousands of fires are blazing.
More and more trees are cut down.
Deforestation of the Amazon rainforest hit its highest rate in a decade.
Today, the Amazon is being destroyed all over again. The question is, can it be saved this time? The first wave of deforestation started in the 1970s. That's when Brazil's military regime saw the potential for profit deep in the Amazon. There were about 5 million square kilometers of rainforest filled with natural resources.
Amazonia's ores and minerals, food, fiber, and forest resources are vast.
But most of it was inaccessible. So the government started building the Trans-Amazonian Highway, an ambitious project that would run for 3,200 kilometers connecting remote parts of the rainforest. At the time, most of Brazil's population lived in the southeast, in cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. And the government wanted to move people out here to cultivate the land and grow the economy. So they offered free land along the highway and paid Brazilians to settle deeper in the rainforest. And they sparked a land rush. As the roads advanced, settlers followed, rapidly clearing the forest around it. Most of them turned their land into pasture, where they raised cows to sell as beef. And when these ranchers needed more land, they seized another plot, cleared it, and moved their cattle in. This expansion deeper into the Amazon drove up deforestation. Between 1978 and 88, an average of over 20,000 square kilometers were cut down each year. Over time, this whole area became known as the art of deforestation. And soon a different product pushed this even further. People around the world were eating more meat, decade after decade. That trend raised the need for more soybeans, which served as the high-protein feed for farmed animals. This created a huge opportunity for countries most suitable for growing soybeans, and Brazil cashed in. Soybean exports from Brazil shot up in the mid-80s, boosting the economy. By the early 2000s, farmers took over these pastures and turned them into massive soy farms, like this one in Acre State.
A minha fazenda eu comprei ela em 2000, porque eu queria partir para fazer agricultura. A soja é muito rentável, a soja é um dos produtos que dá no campo que dá mais dinheiro.
And the ranchers who sold their pastures moved their cattle further into the rainforest, clearing more of the Amazon, often illegally. This aggressive expansion created a profitable pattern in the Amazon.
Primeiro vem boi desmatando, né? Depois vem a agricultura e atrás disso aí vem a indústria. Eu acredito que o começo do desenvolvimento é por aí.
But it came at the cost of the rainforest. By the early 2000s, Brazil's beef and soy industries were driving a booming economy, as well as unprecedented rates of deforestation, which caused this arc to expand further north. The staggering deforestation in the Amazon attracted fierce resistance from environmental groups.
An area of ancient forest the size of a football field is destroyed every 2 seconds.
The Brazilian government, under President Lula da Silva, finally stepped in.
Já em 2003 percebemos que esse tipo de situação não se combate apenas com ações emergencial.
This is Marina Silva. She was Brazil's environment minister in 2003, where she helped craft a plan to stop deforestation.
Então nós resolvemos atacar as causas.
It started with the government expanding the amount of rainforest under protection. At the time, only about 28% was protected and there was very little oversight. But this new plan added more reserves where business activities were strictly banned, and also created more sustainable use reserves, where some businesses, like Brazilian nut harvesting and rubber tapping, which didn't destroy the rainforest, were allowed. More land was also demarcated for indigenous people who preserved the forest. Over time, hundreds of new protected lands were added, transforming the Amazon into a shared and sustainable space.
Com base nesse uso e nesse manejo sustentável, começou-se a pensar uma ideia de preservação, de conservação dos recursos naturais que fosse capaz de integrar numa mesma equação economia e ecologia.
Eventually, almost half the Amazon would be put under some form of protection, while the rest of it remained a mix of pasture, farms, and rainforest. To prevent further deforestation here, the government strengthened the Forest Code, which said landowners could only clear 20% of their private land. This law was monitored by the Forest Service, which was part of the Environmental Ministry, which had jurisdiction over all these protected lands. And the key to enforcing this entire plan was strengthening IBAMA, a police agency that will track and fine people for illegal deforestation.
Na agenda de combate a práticas ilegais, foi um trabalho feito em parceria, fazendo um processo de investigação, utilizando a inteligência para incidir sobre os crimes ambientais e as organizações criminosas.
And the plan showed results, with deforestation rates falling by more than half in 2006. At the same time, an activist movement was forcing the agricultural industry to make a change. Major food companies started feeling pressure from consumers for participating in deforestation. So several got together and in 2006 signed a soy moratorium, which meant they could continue to operate within existing farms, but they wouldn't buy soy from any newly deforested land in the Amazon. 3 years later, beef companies signed a similar agreement. Other countries also gave Brazil money to help it protect the Amazon. So under all this protection, deforestation rates plummeted to historic lows. And yet, Brazil's soy and beef industries continued to grow thanks to more efficient techniques. Ranchers started growing crops on their existing pastures, and farmers planted 2 crops a year on their land instead of 1. Brazil had found a way to make the Amazon both productive and protected. But there were some who still wanted it to be a more profitable place. The Ruralistas, a group of conservative politicians who represent the interests of the agricultural industry, including farmers and ranchers, started gaining influence in Brazil. In the early 2000s, they had about 17% of the seats in Congress, but by 2012 they had about 30%, enough power to push President Dilma Rousseff to weaken the Forest Code, which allowed landowners to get away with clearing more land. In 2016, they pushed President Michel Temer to slash IBAMA's budget. They also helped him pass a law that made it easier for people who illegally seized land in the Amazon to keep it. These changes emboldened some people to seize and clear the rainforest again. And that led to a rise in deforestation rates. In 2018, as the Ruralistas controlled 44% of Congress, Jair Bolsonaro, a right-wing congressman and ally to the Ruralistas, was elected president.
O homem do campo não pode continuar sendo penalizado. O agronegócio é uma das poucas coisas que está funcionando em nossa economia.
On his second day in office, he transferred the Forest Service, which monitors the Forest Code, to the Agricultural Ministry, led by a Ruralista. He's also worked to systematically weaken the Environmental Ministry. Under Bolsonaro, deforestation has increased significantly in 2019, most of it taking place in these protected areas. Setting fires is a common way to clear land, and in August 2019, over 30,000 fires were burning in the Amazon, 3 times as many as August 2018. Many set illegally by ranchers, farmers, and landowners, emboldened by the government's new stance on the Amazon. But this time, the Amazon is unlikely to survive another wave of deforestation. In the last 50 years, it's estimated that about 17% of the Amazon has been deforested. A 2018 report estimated that if it reaches 20 to 25%, the whole rainforest could start to collapse. It wouldn't be enough to cycle all the water it needs, causing trees to die, and that would release a huge amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, further warming the planet. But in Brazil, many politicians and agricultural businesses continue to ignore the science for the sake of profit.
Então a natureza é renovável, Deus sabe o que faz, o homem não vai se está destruindo, a meta do mundo tem que ser destruído mesmo. Gostaria de ver essa floresta aí, porque ela é uma floresta muito rica, né? Mas o meu desejo mesmo era ver ela do jeito que estou vendo aqui na fazenda, na minha propriedade aqui. Ela toda no chão.
Lugar de cultura, é lugar de beleza, é lugar de aromas, de texturas de vida. Então, é algo que deve ser preservado.
Clearing the Amazon for short-term gains overlooks the fact that the planet as we know it wouldn't exist without this rainforest. And it's why this place was saved once before.
All right, so there's some really big
Thanks for watching this.
problems when it comes to clearing land for agriculture. And again, like this is a really tricky topic because is it bad for people in Brazil to want to create a living for themselves? Is it bad for them to want to get out of poverty? Is it bad for them to want to boost their economy so they can get medicine and infrastructure and like life security? Like, no, that's not a terrible thing. But the way that we're coming about it can be really dangerous. So let's talk about the two different ways that we see clearing the forest look like. So the very first way we see it is by clear cutting. So clear cutting is a method where you harvest every single tree in a single area. So either this is done by logging companies or this is done by agricultural people that want the area. So clear cutting, you're taking everything from one area, just completely clearing it out. So this is usually the most preferred method, both for agriculture and for timber. Agriculture likes this because they have more land in one area. They don't have to travel from land to land. For timber harvesting, they like it because it's the cheapest and it's the most efficient way of getting timber. So I want you at your tables really quickly to think about what could be some of the disadvantages of clear cutting. So we know what clear cutting is. So with the people at your table or with an elbow partner, go ahead and talk about what are some disadvantages of clear cutting. Alright, so what were the disadvantages that you guys discussed for clear cutting? So you said, Isaac, what are some of the disadvantages of clear cutting?
It like gets rid of a lot of ecosystems, takes away carbon sinks with the trees, and then takes oxygen.
Awesome. So it takes oxygen from the atmosphere, takes carbon sinks out of the ecosystem, and also just like destroys the ecosystem that it's created, right? Let's do another person. If there's anything besides that you found. Oh, Gavin's not here. This question's gonna go to Hank. So, besides losing oxygen, losing our carbon sinks, and like destroying the ecosystem, can you think of any other reasons why clear cutting would be like a disadvantage? Absolutely, so it's very time consuming, right? So, there are actually some advantages to clear cutting. You might be saying, D-Hart, that makes 0 sense, but we'll get to the advantages and disadvantages of other types too. So, if you clear cut an area and you're using it for agriculture, you're using it for logging, after you're done with the area, you can easily replant trees, right? You just go to that one area and you mass plant all of these trees back. When you do plant the trees, because there are no other trees around them, they all get plenty of sunlight, which means that these saplings can grow big and strong, and they can grow quickly, which is also a benefit. If you are using machines to harvest the trees, you use less CO2 driving to the area, because you drive to one area, you cut down all the trees, and then you drive back. You're not going to millions of different areas. And there's less deforestation due to roads to get to the logging areas. So you only have one road in, one road out. You don't have a million different roads going to a million different areas. So these are all advantages of clear cutting. Oops, do we still need that last slide? Okay. Sorry, I thought the disadvantages were right below it, but disadvantages are way too big to be right below it. Disadvantages. There are far more disadvantages than advantages to clear cutting. Surprise, surprise. So number one, like was said, reduction of pollution and carbon dioxide filtration and storage. So we are losing these trees that their job, their food source, is literally taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it in their plant mass. So trees literally are just a bunch of carbon dioxide that has been taken out of the atmosphere and changed into sugar. They are big masses of carbon. And so when we deforest an area, we are taking the availability of the carbon, we're taking the availability of taking carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into trees, and we are also releasing carbon dioxide by doing that. Another thing that we already said was reduction in biodiversity. So remember, biodiversity, bio means life, diversity means diversity. I can't think of a better description of that. So the more trees we have, the more opportunity we have for different life to be living cohesively in a small area. And so when we take the trees out, we are going to be losing that biodiversity. So trees and organisms reliant on the trees. Next, we have habitat fragmentation. So this idea is, if we had a big habitat in this rainforest, and right in the middle, someone decided to clear out a ton of trees, this is no longer one habitat where species can move freely and intermix and mingle. Now we have this big space in between, and so we have two habitats where you used to have one. So we are fragmenting that habitat, and we are changing the organisms by stopping interbreeding of different organisms on either side. They're not able to move. If the food source for these organisms is on this side of the habitat, they no longer can get that. And so there are big problems like with habitat fragmentation. So it reduces resources and the species fitness. So remember, fitness in science means the availability to reproduce and have your offspring live successfully. So by that definition, I really hope that I'm the fittest person in this classroom. If I'm not, I don't want to know. So just, keep it to yourself. But, so the availability to reproduce and have your offspring survive. Increased stream temperature. Again, cold water does what? Holds oxygen. Let's try this again. I was really disappointed. Cold water does what? Holds oxygen, right? Cold water holds oxygen a lot better than warm water. So, by taking trees out, we are now allowing the sun to hit the streams, which raises the temperature of the streams, which means that they hold oxygen poorly. So we are losing oxygen for the animals in the streams because even though fish have gills, they don't breathe water, they still breathe oxygen. They just take the dissolved oxygen out of the water. So you can't suffocate a fish. So it harms aquatic ecosystems. And then also, if we are taking trees out of an environment, there's nothing holding the soil in place. So Portia actually brought this up when we talked about Biggest Little Farm, where the reason that the soil did not wash away from the rain is because the plants were there holding the soil in place by their roots. So, Amazon rainforest, do you think it gets a lot of rain?
Yes.
Yes, okay, cool, thank you. I was like, guys, it literally says rain in its title, but it's fine. It gets a lot of rain, and so by taking these trees out and by this deforestation, you are leaving a lot of soil open to erosion. So, landslides and mudslides, loss of soil and nutrients, increasing stream turbidity. So this word turbidity means cloudiness. So the more soil you have that's free, the more soil it's going to get into the water. The more soil it's in the water, the more murky and hard it's going to be for plants to photosynthesize, for animals that hunt using visual acuity to be able to hunt their prey. Any questions on this before we move on? Okay, so at your guys' table, split into advantages of clear cutting and disadvantages of clear cutting. And let's have the disadvantages go first and then the advantages go second. So go ahead and just kind of digest what I just told you at your tables. Go. This little